Hello and welcome to CAN TV Community Forum. I'm your host, Dave Kraft. I'm not sure what's worse, enduring the two global nuclear disasters of Chernobyl and Fukushima, or watching our governments in the United States, Eastern Europe, and Japan do all they can to minimize their impacts and purge them from our societal memory. Today's guests are determined to make sure that these nuclear disasters and their horrific effects on humankind are not forgotten. I'm pleased to welcome Irene Zabytko, a Chicago-born author and documentarian, and Dr. Norma Field, Professor Emerita of Japanese Studies at the University of Chicago, author, lecturer, and I welcome both of you to the show today. Now, Irene, you've been working on a documentary about Chernobyl for some time. How's that project going?
We went to Chernobyl and filmed there and returned in 2010 and 2008. And we're still working on it. And then something happened, March 11th, 2011, and Fukushima had the same sort of nuclear reactor meltdown. And thanks again to you and your connections, I was invited to participate in a humanitarian speaking tour, talking about Chernobyl to Japan. Mm-hmm. And I met many of the survivors of the Fukushima catastrophe. And I decided, no, we must include this in the documentary. So this is where we're at now.
Okay. And Norma, you're a longtime Chicagoan. You're teaching Japanese studies at the University of Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
How did you get in this issue?
Yeah, I think one of my oldest childhood memories is sitting at breakfast listening to my Japanese mother and my American U.S. occupation father argue about atmospheric testing, nuclear testing over the Pacific Ocean. My mother thought it was simply terrible and unforgivable. My father took the view that it was necessary to keep those commies at bay. And so, in a sense, that set me in a certain way. I always thought my mother was right and my father was wrong. So it was very clear to me which side I was on then. It was just one of the things in my background. And up until the 1960s, when Japan really made a concerted effort to switch to nuclear energy, there was much more general awareness. Of course, it's closer to the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but after the government decided on the energy policy change, there was a concerted effort to get people over their, what was condescendingly termed their nuclear allergy. So an effort to de-emphasize that historical experience. So it's always been in the back of my mind. It was something I would teach off and on. But after I had a friend who did close field work in Scandinavia on the impact of Chernobyl on the indigenous children, and I lost her. She herself died in her 40s as a downwinder of Hanford. That became more of a front burner issue for me. And I began to teach a course called From Hiroshima, Nagasaki and Beyond, because I wanted students at the University of Chicago to come to realize this wasn't an America issue, it wasn't a Japan-America issue, nor was it just a Soviet Union old-fashioned bad reactor issue, that in fact all of us are being irradiated around the world. And then Fukushima happened, and I felt it was something I couldn't, it is something I just have to grapple with and figure out for myself, because it's crucial to understanding the world we live in and see what tiny thing I can contribute.
And I guess the universe has a great sense of irony in the fact that not only did the nuclear age begin at University of Chicago in 1942, which we memorialized last December, but you're in the most nuclear reliant state in the United States, here in Illinois. So you also put on two conferences. I was wondering if you would talk a little bit about those conferences.
Right. With colleagues and friends, in 2010 we had a first conference, no, it was 2011 May, it was planned for, called The Atomic Age, because we wanted precisely to take up these issues to bring together what has, with an almost religious and scientific devotion, keep separate nuclear energy and nuclear weapons. And we felt it was time to bring them together. And so we invited two documentarians, two women, it turns out, one American, on filming who had made the film Atomic Mom, about her own scientist mother's experiences in being involved in testing in the 50s and thereafter, and a Japanese film about fishermen and fisher folk and farmers on an island who had managed to resist the siting of a nuclear power plant for 30 years. And we want to bring those two people together and make that an occasion for starting the discussion and on why these technologies can't be thought of separately. And as we were preparing for that, which was in May of 2011, Fukushima happened. And so both of our filmmakers and the audience were very keyed to this issue. At first there was some anxiety about whether we would be thought to be taking advantage of a disaster. It's curious how that kind of thing comes up. I understand it, but anyway, it seemed to us important simply to give a historical perspective to what had happened and the sense of urgency. And then we decided, well, we'll follow up in 2012, and we invited Mr. Hiroaki Koide, who teaches at Kyoto University, who has dedicated his career as a nuclear scientist to opposing nuclear energy, paid dearly for it, although he would never say he would pay dearly because the scientific establishment, not to mention the government in Japan, has been entirely pro-nuclear. But he will tell you, we only live once as far as I know, and I think we should do what we really like doing, so opposing nuclear energy. It's been that for him. And then we had Ms. Ruiko Muto, who since Chernobyl had been a nuclear activist and was just getting ready to ramp up her group to finally do something about Japan's nuclear reactors when Fukushima happened, and she ended up being a radiation victim of Hibakusha herself.
Now, both of these conferences, I believe, are still up online.
They're up
aren't
online, and they can be viewed. And
how would people access that?
Well, they're on our website. If you look up Atomic Age, that's one word, and I think that will do it. But if you go to UChicago, and for sure you will get those on Google, and then you can go to conferences or symposium. And we have as much in both languages as possible. We have the PowerPoint projections. We had fine participants from the United States as well in last year. So I really encourage all viewers to use these as references.
Now, both of you have recently been in Japan, and of course you have been over in Ukraine a number of times. I think it's important for viewers to hear, experiences that really popped out at you, because the media here has just dropped these issues like, it's just not an item. Certainly not Chernobyl after 27 years, but surprisingly even Fukushima after 2 years has pretty much dropped off the radar screen. So you have been in Ukraine recently. Want to talk about that?
Well, I was in Ukraine, in Kiev, actually, for a month. I had an IREX scholarship, fellowship, to research some archival material they still needed for our documentary. And as I was watching the news one night, I realized that liquidators were still protesting, excuse me, because they weren't getting their pensions. The liquidators being the first responders for after Chernobyl happened.
And there were as many as 800,000 by some counts.
800,000, that's correct. Yeah. And they were promised, oh, don't worry, we're going to take care of you the rest of your life, health situation, don't worry about it. And they were not getting their pensions, or not getting any health benefits at all. So they were protesting on the first day of Parliament, which opened in January, the new Parliament session. And they came from all over Ukraine and Belarus and Russia to protest. And the media paid a little bit of attention, but not very much to them. And the Parliament, of course, parliamentarians did not pay any attention to them at all. And so they had to leave the next day, and they did, because the police came in, and that was the end of the protest for that time. And then in February, I was watching with my friends. I had dinner with some old friends, and watching what everyone in Ukraine is watching these days, a soap opera called Roxolana, who was the wife of the Sultan, Suleiman the Magnificent. It's a soap opera from Turkey. Everyone's watching this thing because apparently Roxolana was Ukrainian and she was kidnapped, and that's a whole other story and a whole other show.
Okay,
But
you read a book.
Okay, yeah. So it was, everyone's watching this, but in between the segments, which is a long serial thing, they have a news broadcast. And the news broadcast for the particular night I was watching, the roof, the sarcophagus, the new one that the French have financed, that they're currently building at Chernobyl, has collapsed.
And the sarcophagus is?
The sarcophagus was the makeshift covering. The nuclear reactor roof blew up. So for the last 27 years, they had this makeshift concrete structure, it was a dome-like structure to contain the radioactive material that still spews out, because it's very porous still, and goes onto the atmosphere even then and now. And they were trying to, I don't know what happened, but it took them a long time for them to get money. They had some money coming in, the government didn't know what happened to it, that kind of situation. So finally the French did kick in some millions of euros to finally help build the new rooftop structure. And that particular night I was watching television in February of this year. There was the news item that, there was a collapse of the new roof containment. But don't worry, no radiation, don't worry about it. And that was it. It was off the radar screen, literally, again. The media covered it a little bit. There was no footage of Chernobyl or the damaged new roof or anything, or anybody being interviewed about it. Just the news blip, and that's it, and all the Ukrainian media. So I have to go back now and see what really happened. I wasn't allowed in either. I tried to go back to Chernobyl in February. They wouldn't allow me to come in. So
that's interesting, because the last I heard, Ukraine was really looking into tourism for the Chernobyl region.
But that was the week the roof collapsed, so they were a little skeptical of my coming in and asking questions and things.
Maybe Disney will make a bid at some point.
Yeah.
And you've been in Japan recently, haven't you? What's the situation?
I was in Japan most recently at the end of April and early May. And I have to tell you, I've spent very little time in Fukushima to date. I hope to be spending more. So Irene probably has spent more time than I have. But what struck me on this most recent visit, I went with Ms. Muto, who came to our symposium. She and her partner drove me around. And what you saw everywhere, you could mistake almost for the rolled up barrels of hay on a Wisconsin pasture in summer. That's where the miscellaneous items that have been cleaned up from so-called decontamination. And maybe I can tell our viewers that the word in Japanese, it's a new word, it's a neologism that's come up with Fukushima. It says remove impurities. But many people, including experts, are now saying it should properly be called move impurities, because that's all that can be done. So you have, in the places where decontamination has been mandated, these materials from household goods, branches, etc., are compacted and rolled up in, this is a technical term, the flexible container bag. You can find them online, and for different prices, they last for different, I think the expensive ones are said to be good for 4 to 5 years. So you have these rolled things all dotting the landscape. And I was told that since people don't want the stuff that came off their own property close to them, since that was what decontamination's all about, they're moved closer to the roadside, which then brings them closer to how school children go to school. So you really get the sense of how there is no escape. There is no escape. This I wasn't there for, but I thought a really interesting development that took place right before after my visit was, and Ms. Muto is involved in this too, along with many other efforts, is a lawsuit asking that children be allowed to evacuate to safe areas on the principle that children have a constitutional right to study in safe places. This suit had been thrown out in the district court, and this was the Sendai High Court, the equivalent of our appellate system. So the next step is the Supreme Court. It was also turned down. The plaintiffs were turned down by the Sendai High Court, but the reasoning was fascinating. The judges, as a 3-judge panel, said, it is true that these children are studying in schools that have radiation levels that are likely to cause harm to their health. However, school at most only takes up 8 hours of their day, and they go back to homes that are equally contaminated. Therefore, there is no point in our mandating, in our acknowledging the suit. So it was thrown out, but this is, I believe, the first time a judicial body has recognized that children are studying in dangerous places. And so the activists hope to run with this for the Supreme Court struggle.
And now this is after the attempts of the government to elevate the permissible standards of exposure for children to 20 millisieverts a year,
and then lower it again.
Which is the equivalent of a nuclear worker in the United States.
Right. But these are not children in the evacuation zone. These are in the major cities. The major cities that people from the evacuation zone, in fact, have evacuated to. But they are, as one middle schooler wrote somewhere in the first year after the disaster, I get it. I get why we can't leave the city. It's because it's a bullet train stop. You can't shut down. You can't disrupt the bullet train.
So the issue of radioactive contamination, in both situations, I'm wondering if you see some similarities in what went on in Belarus, Ukraine, West Russia, with what's going on in Fukushima and in Japan, both in the past and currently. Have you talked to people who have similar situations?
I have, and basically the health concerns, and especially speaking to Fukushima survivors, and how the government, again, it's the government, they were not looking out for anyone's best interest. Nobody really knew what was going on at the time it happened. The few people that were able to get any information, again, got it through other sources, not the government. In Fukushima, the people were able to find out that the reactor did melt down because they had people in the Green Party telling them. So there was a whole network of information that was coming through. But nobody else really knew what was happening, and no one was telling them anything. As in Chernobyl, they would try to keep it a secret. I mean, Gorbachev wouldn't admit to the West that, no, there's nothing going on, don't look behind the Iron Curtain here, so to speak. So I think it's the lack of information, the lack of accurate information even today. In Ukraine, there is this Ukrainian anti-Chernobyl stigma. If you come from Chernobyl or from the zone, or your family was from there, and people just assume you just want money from the government. And I hear that a lot also of the residents from Fukushima saying the same things. They don't want to really tell people that they're from there. They're a little concerned that that's going to also cause them some, they want to have a normal life. Everyone wants normalization, which is fine, but they're also not being aware, or there's a lot of denial in terms of their health issues. And so that's the other thing. And the misinformation. If you drink vodka, you're going to be okay. If you drink sake, you're going to be okay. I've heard that too. And interestingly enough, when I was in Japan, we traveled with doctors, physicians, and many people from mostly Fukushima came there on purpose to have their children, in particular, have a health exam by these doctors, or some advice about, is this going to be because of Fukushima? What am I supposed to look for? What are the symptoms? What am I concerned about? What should we be eating? What should we not be eating? No one is really telling them much. And again, it's this lack of information, it's denial. And in Ukraine, I found that no one really wants to talk about it anymore. Oh, that happened so many years ago. What do you care? We have other problems right now.
Now, you had put together some trailers for the original concept of your film,
yes.
Life in the Dead Zone.
That's correct.
Which, by the way, people can see online.
They still can see it online, yes.
It's lifeinthedeadzone.com.
Yes.
Right. And I recall one of the scenes in there was an Epiphany scene where, in the middle of winter, of course, January, Eastern Orthodox, the priests are coming out blessing water. You mentioned that people believe if they were told, or they believe that if they drink this blessed water, it will cure the radiation.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. One thing I think that would surprise people is that I have heard from people in Fukushima too, and others, that as bad as the Soviet Union was, that delayed, the mandatory evacuation was good, that they wish that had happened in Japan too. Because if it's mandatory, then you don't have the terrible family splits of grandma doesn't want to move, we can't move. The husband says we can't, we have to pay the mortgage. If the government demands it, then everyone would have had to leave, at least for a time. It's now water under the bridge or radiation everywhere, but there is that view too.
So this notion of the radiation, what would you call it, I guess, just kind of minimization. We see it in Japan. We see it in Europe, of course. The United States EPA just recently promulgated so-called guidelines where if there were a nuclear disaster here, the government would not be obligated to clean up to a certain level. I'm wondering if you folks perceive this as a trend. There's a Japanese word, hibakusha, people being exposed to radiation. We saw it after the bombings. We clearly are seeing it after Chernobyl and after Fukushima. Is this a normalization of radiation? What are we dealing with here?
Sure. I mean, that's a similar thing is happening now, even with the mandated decontamination. The prefecture of Fukushima has said they want all their residents back by 2020. Clearly they want to hang on to their tax base in order to continue to exist. And in order to do that, at first the promise was that the areas would be decontaminated to 1 millisievert a year under. And now people are saying, the government is beginning to say, that may not be possible. So just on the bureaucratic level, we see that preparation. But I think, yes, it is a normalization. And just as Irene said, people don't want to talk about it. If you were to go to Tokyo today, you would not feel that anything terrible had happened, although Fukushima in so many ways is more than Fukushima. It's really all over the country and a lot of the world too, since radiation, as we know, travels through air and water and soil and food. But it's also, if you're not literally in Fukushima, then you can deny it. Even if you are in Fukushima, you can start to deny it and you start resenting. Saw a news show about people in the cities to which evacuation zone victims are living, where they've moved, and those people are beginning to conceal the fact that they live in temporary housing, etc., because their fellow Fukushima citizens are getting annoyed with their presence.
But I found the protests in Tokyo to be very encouraging, and there were massive protests every week, and still, I think, and I actually went to one, and I was just very impressed. I mean, I don't know if this is a cultural shift as well for people to go in the streets like this and to be more vocal. I saw a lot of that activism in public, and I wasn't aware that the Japanese people culturally were comfortable with that. So this is a whole other level of things, but I don't know how much longer they can sustain that. I also found that many people were joining the Green Party, especially in Koriyama. There are many officials there that are Green Party advocates and representing the Green Party and wanting to put Fukushima in very importantly, to especially the children's schools and how contaminated it is even in Koriyama. So there is this level of activism, but again, I wonder, is it reaching out for the entire country? Are we hearing about it? I don't hear about it anymore. I know that bloggers are being censored. How can you sustain that activism? And in Ukraine, I don't even see much of activism, really. As I mentioned, the liquidators, they did one-day protesting, and that's it.
Okay, we're coming to the end. It's hard to believe that we're coming to the end of the show.
We have so much more to say.
Yes.
No, well, this is your big chance. I want to give each of you an opportunity. If you had one thing that you wanted the audience to come away with, what is the message that you want them to have? So why don't we start with you, Irene?
Well, we've heard of Chernobyl, we've heard of Fukushima. We're going to hear about another nuclear reactor meltdown somewhere in the world. And we need to understand we cannot trust official sources, and we have to understand the reasons why these things happen, how to protect ourselves and the generations after.
Norma?
I used to think that scaring people would work. You show scary images of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, you show images from Chernobyl, you show images from Fukushima, and I realized that it doesn't seem to get people to behave differently. But so I want to say, yes, there's urgency because, as Irene says, there will be another one. But on the other hand, maybe we can think every day that we are being irradiated, we are irradiating others because every aspect of the nuclear process demands that someone be exposed. Do we want to go on living that way, harming ourselves and depending on the harm of others?
And if you could tell the governments to do one thing, what would it be?
Be honest. Please, try that.
try that, and get with renewables, and there's money to be made too, which is an important factor, obviously, in how the world runs.
And isn't there a plan to put a large wind farm off the coast of Fukushima to replace power?
Yeah.
So we'll come to renewables by accident, won't we? So it seems. So, all right. Any last parting words here?
Well, we're going to, as I say, change our documentary, and the new title will be One Sky, to include the world, because the world certainly is involved one way or another.
So you're merging the two disasters.
The two disasters and beyond, I think.
And your plans for the future?
Well, I want to write about Fukushima, and I want to find out how we who are temporarily safe can be most responsible.
All right. Thank you both for coming back. It's good to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You've been watching Community Forum. It's a community service of CAN TV. If your nonprofit organization would like to use CAN TV, call 312-738-1400 and ask for nonprofit services. Time into Community Forum for local issues and concerns tune in, to Community Forum for local issues every Saturday evening at 7:30 p.m. on CAN TV 21. My name's Dave Kraft. Thank you for watching, and stay well.